4:47 a.m. Central Standard Time, Houston, Texas. The federal convoy moved without sirens. 18 black Chevrolet Suburbans, 4 armored personnel carriers, 2 mobile command units, all traveling in synchronized silence through the empty streets of Houston's downtown district. The sky was still dark. The city was asleep. But inside those vehicles, 340 federal agents were already at war. At exactly 4:52 a.m., the lead vehicle stopped outside a glass and steel building on Travis Street. The structure was not a warehouse. It was not an abandoned factory. It was not a border stash house or a back alley drug den. It was a state senator's district office. The building had a parking garage, a marble lobby, and a receptionist desk with fresh flowers replaced every Monday morning. It had conference rooms, filing cabinets, and framed photographs of community events. It had a staff of 11. It had constituent service hours posted on the front door. It had an American flag in the window, and for the last 19 months, it had been the central coordination hub for one of the largest cartel-run narcotics and money laundering operations ever discovered on U.S. soil. The breach began at 4:53 a.m. FBI hostage rescue team operators entered first. DEA Special Response Team agents followed. ICE Homeland Security Investigations units secured the perimeter. Houston Police Department SWAT provided backup containment. No one shouted. No one fired a weapon. The building was surrounded, penetrated, and locked down in under 4 minutes. By 5:11 a.m., 12 individuals inside the building were in federal custody. By 6 a.m., the operation had expanded to 47 additional locations across Harris County, Fort Bend County, and Montgomery County. Law offices, medical clinics, freight companies, storage facilities, private residences in gated communities, a luxury car dealership, a construction firm, a non-profit organization. Every location was connected to the same network. By 9 a.m., the total number of arrests reached 421. The seized evidence included 22 metric tons of illicit narcotics, primarily fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin. $480 million in cash, stored in vacuum-sealed bags inside commercial safes, false wall compartments, and buried shipping containers. 94 vehicles, including armored SUVs and cargo vans with hidden compartments. 200 firearms, many of them fully automatic and sourced from cartel armories in Mexico. Encrypted communication devices, ledgers, shipping manifests, surveillance equipment, and documentation linking the operation to 14 other states. This was not a drug bust. This was the exposure of a shadow state. This was not a typical raid. The public announcement came at 11 a.m. The press conference was held at the FBI Houston field office. The speakers included the special agent in charge of the FBI Houston Division, the DEA Assistant Special Agent in charge, the ICE Homeland Security Investigations Deputy, Special Agent in charge, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Texas, and representatives from the Texas Department of Public Safety and the U.S. Marshal Service. The lead speaker did not open with a celebration. He opened with a timeline. For 19 months, this organization operated with full impunity inside the city of Houston. It processed over $1.2 billion in narcotics revenue. It coordinated the distribution of fentanyl and methamphetamine to street-level dealers in 8 states. It laundered money through legitimate businesses, professional service firms, and nonprofit entities. It employed U.S. citizens with clean records, advanced degrees, and professional licenses. It did not hide in the shadows. It hid in plain sight. He paused. The danger we face today is not the kind that announces itself. It is not the kind that operates from the margins. It is the kind that embeds itself inside the institutions we trust, and that makes it exponentially more dangerous. The phrase was repeated by every major news outlet within 2 hours. Exponentially more dangerous. Because this operation did not fit the public's mental image of organized crime. There were no gang tattoos, no street corners, no rundown neighborhoods. The individuals arrested included a licensed attorney, 2 certified public accountants, a real estate broker, a logistics coordinator with a master's degree in supply chain management, and a former city council aide. The senator whose office was raided was not charged. He was not implicated. He was not aware. That was the point. The cartel did not need his cooperation. They needed his credibility. They rented office space in his building. They used his address on shipping documents. They attended community meetings. They donated to local charities. They created a paper trail of legitimacy. And behind that legitimacy, they moved 22 tons of poison into American neighborhoods. The invisible system. The operation had a name inside federal files: Operation Iron Veil. It began with a single arrest in San Antonio, Texas, 14 months earlier, a traffic stop, a broken taillight, a nervous driver, a K-9 alert, and a hidden compartment containing 14 kilograms of fentanyl. The driver was a 26-year-old college graduate with no criminal record. He had a job in sales. He had student loans. He had a clean social media profile. And when questioned, he gave investigators a phone number. That phone number led to another number. That number led to an address. That address led to a freight company. And that freight company led to a network that stretched from Sinaloa, Mexico, to Houston, Texas, to distribution cells in Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. The network did not rely on violence. It relied on invisibility. Cartel operatives did not wear cartel colors. They wore business casual attire. They drove leased sedans. They worked in climate-controlled offices. They filed tax returns. They had LinkedIn profiles. They used encrypted messaging apps, but they also used Microsoft Outlook. They scheduled meetings using Google Calendar. They communicated in corporate language: shipments, clients, deliveries, logistics. The fentanyl came across the border in commercial trucks, registered to legitimate freight companies. The trucks carried legal cargo: electronics, textiles, auto parts. The drugs were hidden inside false panels, hollowed axles, and modified fuel tanks. The trucks were inspected. They passed inspection. Once inside the United States, the drugs were transferred to warehouses in Houston. The warehouses were leased under the names of shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada. The companies had websites, they had business licenses, they had bank accounts at major financial institutions. They paid their taxes. The cash was laundered through a rotating system of fronts. Law offices invoiced for legal services never rendered. Medical clinics billed for procedures never performed. Construction companies reported inflated expenses on projects that were never completed. Nonprofit organizations claimed donations from anonymous sources. The money moved through a dozen accounts before being wired to cryptocurrency exchanges, converted to Bitcoin, and transferred to cartel financial coordinators in Guadalajara. None of it looked illegal. That was the design. The cartel's strategy was not to evade detection. It was to make detection irrelevant. They understood that federal law enforcement agencies process millions of financial transactions, border crossings, and business filings every day. They understood that bureaucracy creates blindness. They understood that a criminal enterprise hidden inside the framework of legal commerce is nearly impossible to identify without a breakthrough. The breakthrough came from human error, a single wire transfer, a single misrouted payment, a single inconsistency in a freight manifest, and federal investigators began pulling threads. For 19 months they watched. They did not move. They did not make arrests. They built a map. They identified every address, every phone number, every business, every vehicle, every person. They used wiretaps. They used undercover operatives. They used drones. They used financial forensics. They used the full scope of federal surveillance authority, and when they moved everywhere at once. Scale and consequences. 22 tons of narcotics. To the public, that number is abstract. It is a statistic. It is a headline. But inside the DEA, that number is translated into a different metric. Death count. 1 kilogram of pure fentanyl contains approximately 1 million lethal doses. 22 metric tons equals 22,000 kilograms. At current street-level purity rates, that volume represents approximately 14 billion individual doses. The U.S. population is 335 million. The fentanyl seized in Operation Iron Veil was enough to kill every person in the United States 41 times. But the cartel did not plan to kill everyone. They planned to addict them. Fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. It is 100 times more potent than morphine. It is synthesized in clandestine labs in Mexico using precursor chemicals sourced from China. It is mixed with heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and counterfeit prescription pills. Users do not know they are consuming it. Many do not survive their first use. In 2022, fentanyl was responsible for over 73,000 overdose deaths in the United States. That number represents more American deaths than the entire Vietnam War. It represents more deaths than car accidents. It represents more deaths than gun violence. In Texas alone, fentanyl deaths increased by 89% between 2020 and 2023. In Houston, the number of fatal overdoses tripled. The drugs seized in Operation Iron Veil were destined for distribution networks in 8 states. Those networks supplied street dealers, pill mills, and online vendors. The end users were teenagers, college students, construction workers, nurses, veterans, parents. Many of them believed they were buying Xanax, Percocet, or Adderall. They were buying fentanyl pressed into counterfeit pills that looked identical to legitimate pharmaceuticals. The result was predictable. Emergency rooms across Houston reported a 140% increase in overdose admissions over the 18 months preceding the raid. Paramedics in Harris County administered naloxone, the opioid overdose reversal drug, at record levels. The county medical examiner's office expanded its morgue capacity twice. But the overdose deaths were only the visible consequence. The invisible consequences were economic, social, institutional. Addiction destroys productivity. It destroys families. It destroys trust. It creates crime. It creates demand for social services, healthcare, law enforcement, and incarceration. The economic cost of the opioid epidemic in the United States exceeds $1 trillion annually. That cost is distributed across every taxpayer, every business, every school, every hospital. The cartel did not pay that cost. They profited from it. $480 million in cash. That money was not sitting idle. It was being reinvested into more drugs, into more distribution networks, into more fronts, into more corruption, into political influence, into violence. Because the cartels are not street gangs. They are transnational criminal organizations with military-grade weaponry, intelligence networks, and financial resources that rival nation-states. They control territory. They control governments. They control entire economies. And they are expanding. War-level federal response. Operation Iron Veil was not executed by a single agency. It was a coordinated multi-jurisdictional task force involving the FBI, DEA, ICE Homeland Security Investigations, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Harris County Sheriff's Office, the Houston Police Department, and local law enforcement agencies from 6 surrounding counties. The operation was planned for 11 months. Surveillance began with wiretaps, authorized under Title III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act. Federal agents monitored over 200 phone lines, email accounts, and encrypted messaging applications. They tracked financial transactions through FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They used geolocation data to map movement patterns. They used confidential informants to infiltrate meetings. They used drones. Unmanned aerial vehicles conducted overhead surveillance of warehouses, private properties, and suspected stash houses. Infrared imaging detected heat signatures consistent with drug production. Aerial reconnaissance documented vehicle movements, delivery schedules, and personnel rotations. They used undercover operatives. Federal agents posed as buyers, suppliers, and logistics coordinators. They gained access to encrypted communication channels. They documented transactions. They recorded conversations. They built a prosecutable case. And they waited. The decision to execute the operation on that specific morning was not random. It was strategic. Intelligence indicated that a major shipment was scheduled to arrive in Houston within 48 hours. The timing of the raid was designed to intercept that shipment, dismantle the distribution network, and arrest every individual connected to the operation before they could flee, destroy evidence, or retaliate. The operation was rehearsed. Federal agents conducted dry runs at a mock facility constructed at a training site outside Houston. They practiced entry procedures, room clearing, evidence seizure, and suspect apprehension. They identified potential complications. They assigned roles. They synchronized movements. At 4:47 a.m., they deployed. The raid on the senator's office was the symbolic centerpiece, but it was not the operational core. Simultaneous raids occurred at 46 additional locations. Each location was assigned a dedicated team. Each team had a specific objective: arrest, seizure, containment. By 6:30 a.m., the operation had secured 94 vehicles. Federal agents used hydraulic tools to dismantle hidden compartments in SUVs, cargo vans, and trucks. They found fentanyl bricks wrapped in plastic and tape. They found cash bundled in grocery bags. They found ledgers written in code. They found GPS trackers, police scanners, and body armor. By 8 a.m., forensic teams were processing 22 tons of narcotics. The drugs were transported under armed escort to a secure DEA facility. Each package was weighed, photographed, tested, and logged into evidence. The fentanyl was marked for destruction. The methamphetamine was marked for destruction. The cocaine was marked for destruction. By 10 a.m., the $480 million in cash was under federal custody. The bills were counted by machine, tested for chemical residue, and traced for serial numbers. Some of the cash smelled like gasoline. Some of it was vacuum sealed. Some of it was so tightly compressed that it had fused into solid bricks. By noon, 41 individuals were in federal detention. They were not all charged with the same crimes. Some were charged with conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Some were charged with money laundering. Some were charged with racketeering. Some were charged with firearms violations. Some were charged with obstruction of justice. The highest-level targets were identified as cartel operatives with direct connections to the Sinaloa Cartel and Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the two most powerful criminal organizations in Mexico. These individuals coordinated logistics, managed finances, and directed violence. The mid-level targets were U.S. citizens who provided professional services, attorneys who structured shell companies, accountants who laundered money, logistics coordinators who arranged shipments, real estate brokers who purchased properties under false names. The low-level targets were drivers, couriers, and lookouts. Many of them had no prior criminal record. Many of them were recruited with promises of easy money. Many of them did not fully understand the scope of the operation they were serving. None of them were safe from prosecution. The aftermath. The public response was immediate. Within hours, the hashtag Houston Senator Raid was trending nationally. News helicopters circled the downtown office building. Reporters crowded the sidewalks. Cameras captured federal agents loading evidence into unmarked vans. The senator released a statement. He expressed shock. He expressed cooperation. He expressed full support for federal law enforcement. He emphasized that he had no knowledge of the criminal activity conducted in his building. He was not charged. He was not implicated. But his name was forever linked to the operation. That was the invisible damage. The raid did not just dismantle a cartel network. It shattered public trust. Residents of Houston began to question their surroundings. If a senator's office could be used as a cartel front, what else was compromised? The law firm downtown? The medical clinic in the suburbs? The logistics company near the port? The nonprofit that sponsored the youth soccer league? Institutional credibility collapsed overnight. The businesses raided in Operation Iron Veil were not back-alley operations. They were established entities. They had been operating for years. They had clients. They had employees. They had reputations. And now, every one of those clients, employees, and community members had to reckon with the fact that they had been unknowingly adjacent to a criminal empire. Employees who worked in those offices faced unemployment, legal scrutiny, and social stigma. Clients who used those services faced questions from federal investigators. Neighbors who lived near those properties faced the realization that 22 tons of fentanyl had been stored within blocks of their homes. The psychological impact was profound. Parents questioned whether their neighborhoods were safe. Business owners questioned whether their competitors were legitimate. Teachers questioned whether their students' families were involved. Law enforcement officers questioned whether their colleagues had been compromised. Because the raid exposed a fundamental truth: modern organized crime does not wear a mask. It wears a suit. The warning. There is a photograph from the morning of the raid. It shows a federal agent standing in front of the senator's office building, holding a cardboard box filled with evidence. The box contains ledgers, USB drives, and a single framed photograph, a community service award presented to the office for its work with local schools. The photograph was not staged. It was not symbolic. It was documentation. But it became the image that defined Operation Iron Veil, because it represented the central strategy of modern cartel operations: the weaponization of trust. The cartels understand that law enforcement can disrupt violence, they can intercept shipments, they can arrest dealers, but they cannot easily disrupt legitimacy. They cannot easily intercept paperwork. They cannot easily arrest a licensed attorney who files incorporation documents for a shell company that exists only on paper. The cartels have adapted. They no longer rely on force as their primary tool. They rely on camouflage. They embed themselves inside the structures of legal society. They exploit the assumption that danger looks dangerous. They exploit the assumption that criminals look like criminals. They exploit the assumption that a marble lobby, a receptionist desk, and an American flag in the window means safety. That assumption is now a liability. The 421 arrests made in Operation Iron Veil represent a victory, but they do not represent an ending. The network that was dismantled in Houston is replicated in dozens of other cities. The infrastructure that was seized in Texas exists in dozens of other states. The strategy that was exposed in this operation is being refined and redeployed across the country. The cartels are not retreating, they are evolving, and the public is not prepared, because preparation requires awareness. It requires skepticism. It requires the willingness to question the familiar. It requires the recognition that the greatest threats are not always visible. They are hidden inside the routines of daily life. They are disguised as professionalism. They are masked by paperwork. They are protected by the assumption that institutions are inherently trustworthy. That assumption is what the cartels depend on. And it is what federal law enforcement is now working to dismantle. The U.S. Department of Justice has announced that Operation Iron Veil is the first phase of a broader initiative targeting cartel embedded infrastructure in American cities. Additional operations are planned. Additional arrests are expected. Additional seizures are imminent. But those operations depend on public vigilance. Federal authorities have urged citizens to report suspicious activity, not the kind of suspicious activity that fits a stereotype, the kind that fits a pattern. Businesses that operate with minimal foot traffic but significant cash flow. Properties that receive frequent deliveries but show no visible commercial activity. Individuals who maintain professional appearances but exhibit inconsistent work histories or financial behaviors. The warning is clear. The next cartel front will not look like a cartel front. It will look like a legitimate business. It will look like a professional service. It will look like a community organization. It will look like the kind of place you would walk into without hesitation. And that is exactly the point. Final statement, 4:47 a.m. Central Standard Time, Houston, Texas. The federal convoy moved without sirens. By 9 a.m., 421 individuals were in custody. 22 tons of narcotics were seized. $480 million in cash was under federal control. A cartel network that had operated with impunity for 19 months was dismantled. But the war is not over. Because the cartels do not wage war with violence alone. They wage war with invisibility. They wage war with legitimacy. They wage war with trust. And the only defense against that kind of war is awareness. Pay attention. Question the familiar. Trust the process, but verify the institutions. Because the next threat will not announce itself. It will wait for you to look away. And by the time you notice, it will already be inside. If this investigation raised questions, share it. If it challenged assumptions, comment. If it reminded you that danger no longer wears a mask, remember it. Because the war for American communities is not fought on foreign soil. It is fought in offices, clinics, and warehouses. It is fought in plain sight. And it is being fought right now.